last.
We come to the reason. You are all here.
Puppetry.
These days, whenever someone mentions rebooting a classic movie or series from our childhoods, it seems the natural reaction tends to be skepticism. Because it feels as though every other movie or TV show released these days is yet another cash grab remake or reboot. So it's easy to become sick of the very notion of updating any movie or show that we loved as children. I've done a whole video complaining about the Disney live-action remakes, so I should know. But every so often, something that sounds like it has the potential to be a train wreck can completely surprise its audience. In this case, sometimes, a series based on a cult classic from the 80s, a film that was made entirely using practical effects at that, can not only perfectly recreate the feel and quality of the original, but in many ways, it can actually surpass it. Yeah, who'd have guessed that of all the childhood hits from the late 20th century, The Dark Crystal would get the best reboot? Well, today I'd like to talk about it. Rather than pick a trash fire to criticise, I'd like to take a good look at a series many of us may have assumed would crash and burn that turned out to be an absolute diamond in the rough. So, just what went right with The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance? First, I'd like to talk about the original movie. This film was conceived by Muppets creator Jim Henson, and while not a massive hit at the box office, it very much did gain a cult following that simply adored not only the sheer work that went into creating an original movie purely presented through puppetry and practical effects, but also the dark nature of a film otherwise aimed towards children. For decades there had been talk of a sequel, but nothing came about. It wasn't until 2019, 37 years after the release of the original, that we received a prequel TV series. And, to the surprise of many, it wasn't just good, it was brilliant. The series is set in the world of Thra, a world once looked after by the Avatar of the Land, Mother Aughra, and the native race known as the Gelflings. That is, until a race of large vulture-like beings known as the Skeksis offered to protect the heart of the land, an object known as the Crystal of Truth, in exchange for the Gelflings' servitude. Now, 1,000 years later, it's revealed that the cruel, hedonistic Skeksis have in fact been draining the crystal of its power in order to keep themselves immortal. But this now appears to be failing, so instead they find a way to drain the life essence out of the Gelfling. We follow three characters: Rian, a Gelfling guard who witnesses the Skeksis murdering his girlfriend in order to drain her essence; Breya, a young intrepid princess who is starting to realise the politics of the land are unjust and make no sense; and Deet, a Gelfling from the underground clan of Groton who discovers that because of the Skeksis abusing the crystal, this has led to the creation of a wild, disease-like substance known as the Darkening. While I'm sure many of us were expecting that a series released in the CGI-heavy 2010s would drop the puppetry, Age of Resistance both keeps it and really improves upon it, with so many fascinating worlds and new characters. A lot of the designs of the puppets, in particular the many varied and unique Skeksis puppets, are incredible to look at. While the designs of the original Skeksis have been expertly recreated, some of the new models, from the updated younger version of Skekso the Emperor to the new and perfectly intimidating Skekmal the Hunter, are an absolute treasure to look at and perfectly get across their characters just from their appearances. And the voice acting certainly helps with this too. Simon Pegg does a surprisingly good job of recreating Skeksil the Chamberlain's voice. Jason Isaacs, unsurprisingly, gives a perfect deep evil overlord voice for Skekso, and Andy Samberg's performance as Skek-Gra the Heretic is pretty hilarious. If I had any criticism, I would say that the Gelfling are a little unexpressive and do often look a bit too artificial, though I can forgive this for two reasons. Number one, because the Gelfling from the original movie were also probably the least impressive looking of the puppets, and number two, because once you get to know and enjoy these characters, you kind of just start to ignore it. But on top of the impressive looking puppetry, the world building in general is masterfully crafted. We get to learn about the Gelfling culture through their various different clans, as well as the amazing environments and creatures living in Thra. In terms of the actual story, I really did like how it was able to deliver interesting plot threads for each of our heroes, to the point where there was rarely a moment where I felt like I wanted to skip a scene to move on to a different thread. Also, I'll say now that sometimes, whenever I had a nitpick about a potential plot hole, quite often the story was actually able to answer it. Like, why can't Rian prove his story is true through dream fasting? Well, his father actually does bring that up, and the Skeksis decide to spread a lie that Rian is sick and that dream fasting will spread the sickness. It is sometimes nice to have those little nitpicky questions answered. Though, what really surprised me most about the series was the fact that, much like Bright, which I reviewed previously, Age of Resistance has a not too subtle political message behind it. But unlike Bright, this show actually does a genuinely good job of getting it across. Basically, we have the hedonistic Skeksis who, despite being the most powerful group, are very small in number, whose overconsumption is leading to immense environmental damage, but the Skeksis distract from this by pitting Gelfling against each other and taking all they can, giving little back. That sounds a lot like the 1% of our own world in relation to pollution and overconsumption. Though, admittedly, it could pretty much apply to any real-world scenario of a more powerful group oppressing people deemed lower classes. What makes the message work is that A, the Skeksis are very much their own characters and not just mere strawmen to act like vehicles for the political message. B, though the message isn't exactly subtle, there's never a moment that feels like the characters winking at the audience saying, "Yep, this is what we're talking about."
Fairy lives don't matter today.
And C, the plot very much explores this message rather than just shoving an allegory on screen to show off how clever they're being. Rather than saying, look, the Skeksis are the upper class and they're mean, and the Gelflings are the lower class and they're heroes, the show actually explores why the situation is the way it is and how to change. It shows how the more powerful Gelflings have been compliant. It shows how some, like Celadon, are willing to do anything to maintain the status quo. And it actually provides hope. It doesn't judge the audience or try to guilt trip them, but rather gives a message that hope and change are possible. There's a fantastic scene in an earlier episode where Skeksis the Chamberlain gives a speech explaining to the others how the Gelfling will never resist Skeksis' rule because to admit the Skeksis are evil would be to not believe. They'd be admitting that their entire way of life was a lie, that they've wasted 1,000 years away serving the Skeksis, and that the only way out is to change everything. While this is already a powerful moment, given, everything he's saying is true and revolutions are by no means simple, his words are contrasted by the footage we're shown on screen of our three heroes taking the first steps to begin the Age of Resistance. While the Chamberlain makes a strong point, it still gives hope that, though resistance is hard, it's not impossible. That scene alone tells a better political allegory than the entirety of Bright as far as I'm concerned. I could say more about this series, but I don't want to ramble too much or cross into spoiler territory. Instead, I simply recommend watching it. The whole series is available on Netflix, and it is something you can get through in just a mere couple of days. And no, you don't necessarily need to watch the first film in order to understand the plot. In fact, again, not to spoil too much, But the episode that finally explains the backstory of the Skeksis as we saw in the first film is so good, and the way that they tell the story is genuinely clever and enjoyable. To conclude, in an age where so many of our childhood classics are being watered down and made as bland or marketable as possible, I am so happy that The Dark Crystal managed to get not only a good reboot, but one that actually understands and respects the original. The art is still fantastic, the world building is truly up to par, and it still remains so incredibly dark despite technically being for children. It well and truly feels like this series wasn't just made for a quick cash grab to appeal to nostalgia, but rather as a truly worthy addition to the original movie, and a touching tribute to the mind of the late great Jim Henson. Despite all odds, they well and truly got it right. Thanks for watching the video. I've wanted to do a positive review on this series ever since I watched it, and while I'm sure it won't be for everyone, I still very much recommend checking it out, or sharing your opinion in the comments section. As always, like, share and subscribe and all that jazz, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye!